Don't know how this is going to go, but welcome, for what it's worth, to what I hope can become a series of these live painting sessions for this channel. I had some free time today while waiting for my water heater repairman, so I thought I would do a bit of work on this plein air piece that I started up a couple weeks ago. Let's see. It's just a very simple sort of landscape, painted just clumps of woods across the street from my house. And I painted it outside initially for the underpainting here, and now I'm going to in the studio do some work, kind of cleaning it up, refining some of the details, and talking, I guess, a bit about my process, and hopefully you'll find it interesting, but not so interesting that you can't fall asleep later tonight or whenever it is that you're watching. So yeah, let's get started. Oh my gosh, there's somebody watching. Well, hello, Carlos. Good to see you. Thanks for joining. All right, so I'm gonna start putting out some paints here. I use a combination of oil paints. These Gamblin, I didn't see that, Gamblin 1980 paints, and the Winton oil paints. So nothing too pricey. Not that oil paints are ever really inexpensive, but nothing too dear. You can find them if you're in the States at Michael's, just there in the oil paint aisle. And they have a pretty good selection of colors, and as I said, the price isn't too dear, so I don't mind picking up a bottle or two when I have the chance. So I'm going to put out some of my colors here, and we'll get started on refining some of these details. So for those who are maybe new to my channel, hello and welcome. For those who have somehow subscribed and stayed subscribed, even though I haven't made a video in like, I don't know, a decade, thanks for sticking with me and welcome back. My name is Ray, and I am a art teacher of multiple disciplines in the Pacific Northwest, and I make these little ASMR videos. Hopefully help you all find some peace and calm and get to sleep. And I'm very glad that you decided to join me. So in my painting process, I do a lot of different things depending on what I'm painting. I usually gravitate towards portraiture. I'm a portrait artist, I guess you could say. Um, but when I do landscape paintings, and particularly ones where I paint what's called en plein air, which is French for basically paint outside, paint in plain air. Did I put this one down? Nope. Alright. ADHD strikes again. When I paint in plain air, what I like to do is start with a very loose underpainting where I'm not really worried about details, I'm not really worried about any kind of refining or, anything like that. I'm just looking to establish light, basically capture light and establish form. For those somewhat familiar with art and color theory, light is color. So when we look out at a landscape or anything really, and the colors that we are perceiving, those are created by light. Without light, you can't see color. And if you want proof of this, go into a dark room and tell me what colors you see. Some more people joining, that's so nice. So I like to not really worry again about details, not worrying about subject matter. I'm just strictly out there trying to establish some sense of light and a loose sense of form, so I know what it is I'm going to be painting or refining later. So in this painting, I went out, I sat for maybe 60 minutes with my son. He's practicing gouache painting, so he's been learning plein air as well. And we just sort of sat out and we painted, and it was a short session because it was very cold, and I did not want to paint any longer than about an hour. Even the most dedicated of artists will find their hands start to hurt after about 60 minutes in 30-some degree weather. So I just got down a loose underpaint, let it dry for about a week or two, and then here I am back in the studio to sort of now refine some of those details. So here, I know the angle is a little difficult. I wonder if I can maybe take the camera down a little closer. I'll work on that for the next one, giving you guys a better view. But here I have a fallen log. Here's another fallen log. I have some large trees. I live in the Pacific Northwest, so there's a lot of evergreens where I am, a lot of licorice ferns, and things like that. So just trying to capture some loose impressions of that natural landscape and those native plants. A lot of nettles, very marshy area where I'm at. So there's a lot of wetlands, and so there's often a lot of sort of boggish plants around. That said, I do like to take some artistic license with my paintings, especially if I'm just painting for fun, where I might add some details that I don't necessarily see in the painting, or I might embellish just because I feel like they would add something to the overall painting itself. So here I added some sort of hanging vines, sort of hanging ivy. There is a lot of English ivy. It's not native to the area. It's an invasive species, and it's always trying to climb up our trees and over our fences and into the gardens, and it is quite the hassle to remove. But it is very pretty. So whoever thought, let's bring some ivy. I can't entirely fault them, even as I am annoyed tearing it out year after year after year. Oh, so I'm gonna have to give this a pause because it sounds like my water heater guy is here. But I'll be right back as soon as he gets set up. Not entirely sure how to pause it, but I'll be back on. All right. Thank you, everyone who stuck with me through that. Fun times when you're, oh, that wasn't the right button. Fun times when your water heater is 20 years old and you're go out on you, but no worries. We're going to get that sorted out. In the meantime, back to painting. Where was I was sorting out I may have to get up again if they need me for something, but I should be okay. Just kind of chilling here. I want to start by putting out some of my, I believe, raw sienna. Yeah. And I really like this one. I work with a lot of the what's known as earth ochres because they just, when it comes to landscapes, especially in woodland or forested areas, they really create beautiful, beautiful natural earthy tones, and they feel very warm and comforting. And a lot of times in the art world, we can see some resistance to people when it comes to purchasing like wooded or woodland area paintings because there's just a lot of green, and there's sort of this idea that if you want a painting to sell, don't put a lot of green into your painting because people for some reason they just don't, just not as interested in it as say like seascapes or sunsets or things like that. So we're sort of discouraged from doing it, but they call it sort of the problem with greens. However, if you are, you know, an artist, you don't want to be limited in what your subject matter is ever. You want to be able to paint whatever it is you feel like painting. And so what we find is when we are encountering sort of a desire to paint a landscape with a lot of green in it, and we have this problem of too much greens, oftentimes we get around it by simply balancing it out with a lot of red, either mixing it into the green to temper that color and sort of what we call mute it, make it a little less high chroma, a little less saturated. Or we can kind of balance the greens out by simply adding those reds around in the painting. And that can kind of solve that problem and create really beautiful pieces. And so that's one of the reasons why I do use the earth ochres in my landscapes, because I can go in as hard as I want on greens, and I have these beautiful browns and red browns to sort of balance that out. So it's still very appealing to the eye. Let's see, I've picked up this sort of, I've made a few different mixes here. I like to, when I work in my process, I always, no matter how many colors I put out, I do use my convenience colors just because I'm a mom, I'm limited on time. But I do like to use a more limited palette and always sort of come back to a red, a yellow, and a blue as my primary sort of trio. And depending on what I need to do in a painting, whether I need to make a color darker, make a color lighter, I'll add yellow for a color that needs to be maybe a little bit lighter, or I'll use blue for a color that needs to be a little bit darker, red to sort of balance in between. So that way I can maintain a sort of consistent color harmony in my painting. So no matter what color I need to mix, they always feel like they belong in the same painting, which in the world of painting is really what you want. You don't want to have a painting where it's beautifully rendered, but the colors feel disjointed. It's it would be like playing a discordant harmony in music. You know, you can do it, but are people gonna want to listen to it? So yeah, coming in with this sort of reddish brown with a little bit of this raw sienna color mixed into it. I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to start defining some areas of light. I'm not going too bright to begin with because I don't want to push my highlights too fast. A lot of times young painters, they make the mistake of going too light too fast in their painting, and they won't be able to achieve lighter tones where they need them to be. And so they might still be able to make a nice painting, but it never quite has the level of realism that it could have if it had sort of used those tones as highlights instead of, let's say, midtones. If, again, for those who are not necessarily versed in art or have any experience with art, when we say midtones, we sort of think of it as a light, medium, and dark of a color, and the midtone would be the medium version of that color, whatever it will be. So for this, I'm just coming in here and I'm just defining a few edges. So this top of the log, where it's sort of exposed bark, I'm painting that in. This edge here where the log, the tree trunk is broken off, I'm putting in some reds. We have a lot of what's called western red cedars in this area. They're really, really beautiful trees. They're really wonderful, those and Douglas firs. We have a lot of those in the area where I live. It's sort of the footlands of some mountains. And I have a few of these really large trees in my yard. And I feel they've been there, hundreds of years, so they're many, many stories tall. We joke every fall when the winds pick up that they are the murder trees, because they can get very shaky, and sometimes they do fall or they lose branches, and that can be very dangerous if it falls on your house. We've been very fortunate that none of our trees have had issues like that, and this house has been here 50 plus years. So I'm very grateful not to have been crushed by murder trees. On a happier note, these trees also make a very delicious tea. Sort of an indigenous recipe is to have a sort of a mixed conifer tea. Now, before you run out and start, grabbing pine needles off the nearest tree, make sure that that tree is edible in a sense. Don't just some trees are, like I mentioned, the western red cedar. That one you can make this tea from. The eastern red cedar, for those of you who might be on the eastern seaboard, not good for this tea. It will, it's poisonous, so don't go brewing teas out of strange trees, especially if you're unfamiliar with such things. Remember, this is an art channel, not a cooking or recipe recommendation channel, but I have some family who are native, and so I was very lucky to sort of have a little bit of access to some of this knowledge and the correct type of trees in my area to make this tea from. It's very delicious, as I like to use the Douglas fir and those western red cedar needles. Just low-hanging ones. They don't have to be necessarily or anything. I just use sort of whatever's available, and I never take more than I need so as to not harm the tree. They're very large trees, and I doubt I could take enough to do any real damage, but you still want to be respectful when you're foraging or gathering in nature. We're all part of this big ecosystem, and it's important that we always be sort of aware of our impact on the world around us, big or small. There we go. And it's a very delicious tea. It has a sort of my roommate describes it as Christmas in a cup. It has a very strong sort of citrus. It's a woody flavor. It's a piney flavor. It's very piney, very earthy, but there is a citrus note to it that makes it very refreshing to drink and very enjoyable. And so we have that in the wintertime. It's also these teas are also very high in vitamin C, so if for some reason we had no access to citrus, we would not all die of scurvy, which for those curious is exactly how indigenous peoples in areas that do not have native citrus did not die of scurvy. So a bit of fun history for you there. But getting back to it, I'm just coming in and I'm doing some detail work on these trees to give them some more definition, really working with the bark with my very sort of small brush here. Yeah, it's very tiny details, short strokes, little broken lines that just serve to sort of enhance some of the looser details that I put out a little earlier in my paint. I'm realizing I forgot to put out my solvent jar. Very important when you want to wash your brush. What did I do with that save? Okay. My solvents, keep it in a little jar. When working with oil paint, depending on what type you're using, if you're using a water-based, such as, I think I have one here, this Windsor Newton Artisan series is water soluble. You can use water to clean your brushes. We consider that a little bit more like academic grade. I use it with my students at the studio where I work because it's easier cleanup. And since we don't have super great ventilation, it means that we're not going to be having any problems with fumes or headaches or things like that because it's water, and so that's fine. Artists have their opinions about water soluble versus more traditional solvent based oil paint, and you know, every artist is different and entitled to their opinion. I like convenience. I also like quality, so when I'm at work I have no problem with the water-based oils. I find they work very. All right. Well, we're going to try this third time. Now that I have got this hopefully sorted, we're gonna attempt to go back to the painting. All right. It's not going to be camera. I don't remember what I was saying before my phone died, but I'm going to be going in lining some of the shadows on this. I'm not really working from a reference at this point, based on what I established in my outdoor paint session. I'm just going to be trying to go through and put some shadows in where I feel like it makes sense. Is this like proper technique for realism? No. We generally want to paint where we have some sort of reference to work from. But again, when I'm just painting for myself, I don't mind coming in and being a little bit looser, a little more freewheeling with my process. Been painting for a while, using art for a while, so I feel fairly okay with just kind of winging the colors a little bit. I'm just sort of thinking, if we say this large area would be our sort of light source area, And a lot of what we're going to see here is going to be sort of in shadow from that, so it'll be darker in this area, kind of curling around here where these trees are. And then we might have a little bit of that top lighting coming through. And if I decide to change it later, then I'll change it. A lot of times my students will stress about getting it just right and having everything sort of planned out. And there is something to be said for starting a painting with a definite plan. But there's also nothing wrong with just starting a painting and finding your way through it. It doesn't so much matter the roads you take to get there, as long as you get there. And I'm wondering if some of these shadows aren't a bit too blue. So I might go back, add a bit more of my yellow, and just sort of take some of that back to green. Just a little bit. I did change the angle of the camera, so hopefully this will be a little bit better for those watching. It won't be so high up. But yeah. When I work oils, like a lot of painters, I like to start with my darkest shades, my darkest tones, all those sort of really, really dark colors, and put those in everywhere that I can first, so that I can build my mid-tones and my highlight, my light tones up on top of them later. I feel this makes it both easier to sort of keep my painting process organized and not become really overwhelmed very quickly, especially when painting something as nebulous as sort of a wooded, forested area where there's lots of really organic details all kind of piled up around each other. But it also allows me to create a sort of physical layering up from the shadows on the lowest layers of the painting, to the tones in the middle, to the highlights on the highest points of the paintings. Because oil paints, like all paints, are a physical medium. They're sitting on top of the paper, not the paper, but in this case, canvas board. But whether you use a canvas or even canvas paper, your oils aren't going to absorb into that material the same way that, say, watercolors would absorb into watercolor paper. They're going to sit on top much more strongly. And so it's always worthwhile to sort of give some thought as to how the physical stacking of that paint is going to affect your finished product. And we're just putting in some small shadows. This is usually the part in my painting process where I would turn on some lo-fi, some music, and just sort of let myself go, get creative, get away with it. It's whatever. Even for most experienced artists and painters, there's still this wonderful element of experimentation. Every time that we sit down to paint, every time that we start a session, there's this just great opportunity to just try some stuff. Throw stuff at the wall, see what sticks. So I like to encourage my students, especially, to not be afraid of that, to not sort of shy away from trying new things, trying trying different colors, trying different techniques, even if they didn't necessarily work out. And a lot of times, they don't. Sometimes, they won't. Sounds like my water heating guys are back.